right, welcome back. Episode 3 of the revamped Lantern Sports Podcast, hosted by the Lantern Sports Desk at The Ohio State University. I'm Stephen Kishpaugh, the Assistant Sports Editor. Joining me as always, Jacob Benge, Sports Editor, Casey Smith and Gabe Burggraf, LTV Sports Producers. Gentlemen, it's good to be here again. It's nice we're making this a weekly thing. Before we get started into previewing Ohio State's nighttime weekend matchup against Toledo, first some news around Ohio State athletics. The defending national champion Ohio State women's hockey team is ranked preseason number 1, voted on by 2 different preseason polls. Defender Sophie Jacques, forward Emma Maltis, and goaltender Amanda Thiel were named to the preseason All-Western Collegiate Hockey Association teams. The number 5 women's volleyball team comes back to Columbus after 2 top 10 wins over last weekend over now number 15 BYU and number 7 Georgia Tech. Emily Londahl was named Big Ten Co-Player of the Week for the second consecutive week, and Mac Pedraza was named Big Ten Setter of the Week. The men's soccer team travels to Akron tonight to face the number 9 Zips in an in-state matchup. Ohio State's coming off a win where they defeated number 12 Butler 2-0 last Friday. They have not allowed a goal in the last 399 minutes of action, and senior keeper Keegan McLachlan has posted his 4th consecutive shutout. And the Buckeyes currently have allowed the fewest goals in the Big Ten. So, gentlemen, with Ohio State, we saw what people expected the offense to look like last Saturday against Arkansas State. Now, they are still missing Jackson Smith-Njigba, and they are still missing Julian Fleming. And earlier today, Ryan Day was asked about their availability. Jacob, do you have any more details on, their health report?
Yeah. It was good to ask Ryan Day just to get an update on what Jackson's looking like as he progresses back from what we believe is a hamstring injury. On the record, it's a leg injury to me. But Ryan said, he expects Jackson to play the Saturday as he does with Julian Fleming. But he went back to his point that they don't want to put either Jackson, Julian, or any player who's hurt for that matter. They don't want to put those players back on the field unless they're 100%. But regardless, Ryan Day said he expects both Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Julian Fleming to play Saturday against the Rockets.
And looking ahead to Toledo, obviously a lot of Buckeye Nation will expect this game to be one similar to last week where it's sort of a tune-up game to see what works and what doesn't. But Toledo's no slouch. They haven't had a below 500 season since 2009. And Jason Candle, their head coach, is 47-27 in his 7th season at Toledo. So they're no pushover by any means. But looking at the spread, it seems like Ohio State, again, is a big favorite to just walk all over their opponent on Saturday. And, over the past 2 weeks, they haven't covered the spread. Casey, do you think that shows more of the type of team Ohio State is currently, or does that show, they're kind of just trying things out right now and they aren't going for those blowout wins?
No, I think they're always going for those blowout wins. I think that's sort of their MO. If Ryan Day could win 100-0, if he could hang 100 on Michigan, win 100-0 any game, I think he'd be able to do it. So, or he'd want to do it. So, as for Toledo, though, I think they're coming in as 34-point dogs. Ohio State, on the other hand, as for them not covering, I don't really see that as an issue. They're playing a lot more of defensive-type games. So I think it doesn't really I don't think it's not a testament to what Ohio State is as a team. And, they're showing improved defensive numbers, so that's all you really want to see ahead of the Big Ten slate coming up after this upcoming Saturday. So, they're top 50 in every single expected points added category, both offensively and defensively. So I think as long as you're trying to get that 1% better each time, each game that you go out and just go 1-0, I think that's all Ohio State really cares about, as opposed to just, covering the spread. They'd love to. They probably would. If they could win 100-0, they probably would, but I don't think that's at the forefront of their mind.
Well, and looking at that defensive effort from Saturday, a lot of miscues, whether it's during the play, Denzel Burke did not have the best day in coverage, or, trying to get a read and jump a snap. Zach Harrison and JT and those guys on the defensive line they were ready to go with that noon kickoff. So a couple of penalties, a couple of miscues, a couple big plays, but nothing that really mattered in the grand scheme of things, just enough to, butter up that spread and make it difficult for bettors. But the defense is going to probably have the same thing this week, just trying to cut down on unnecessary gains that they're giving up. Because going into, a Big Ten schedule, those are the things, if you're in a close game, it matters. But when you're playing Arkansas State or Toledo, it's something that just is a habit that you have to kind of work at to get rid of.
The one thing I've noticed about Jim Knowles, though, he doesn't really flinch. I mean, he gives up a big play or he gets a big play. He said Tuesday in the weekly availability, he's not thinking about the last play. He's thinking about the next play. And that's why he said, I don't really have time to have a yippee or bask in the ambiance and the glory of a successful play, whether that's JT Tuimoloau getting in the backfield and blowing up a play as part of what Jim Knowles doesn't want to be a bend, don't break defense. He wants them attacking every single play and getting a 3 and out, or just simply doing their job and keeping the P's and Q's, whether that's Mike Hall getting up the middle as well on 4th and 1. I mean, he is one of the better coordinators and coaches when it comes to making adjustments. And you saw that in the game against Notre Dame and even this past weekend. I mean, they've only allowed a field goal in the first 2 games in the second half. They've allowed, I'm not great at math, 16 points because they allowed a touchdown to Notre Dame, and then 9 points on 3 field goals by Dominic Zavada of Arkansas State, friend of the show. But then just that field goal last week, that 4th field goal that they allowed, that's all they've allowed in the second half. So Jim Knowles, I think, he doesn't really flinch, whether that's giving up the big play. Then also just his second half adjustments have been next to none.
And I wanted to echo your sentiment on the second half adjustments, because it seems like compared to teams of the past couple of seasons that this Ohio State team isn't afraid to sit guys out and bench them and put them on the sidelines when and if they absolutely have to. Like Gabe mentioned, Denzel Burke did not have the best game on Saturday against Arkansas State. At one point, he gave up, I think it was a 58-yard completion to Champ Flemings of Arkansas State. And I noticed that once Burke had just gotten more frustrated, he let up the big play, he was drawing penalties. Instead of leaving him out there to try to work through it, the coaches brought him to the sideline, and Jim Knowles and everybody who was available to talk to him was talking to him, trying to help him work through what went wrong on that play and what he can improve on, rather than leaving him out there when he's not playing well and potentially getting burned by it.
Well, it's a good point you make, because those are the type of teaching moments you can have against, like I said, Arkansas State and potentially Toledo. Week 1, you had a very clean game between both sides, which is kind of interesting now that we get into week 2 and 3, and there are a couple penalties here and there, some things to tidy up. But speaking to that, at one point it was a one-possession game in the first half. It was 17-9, and Arkansas State had not scored a touchdown. The offense hadn't really broken out yet. But you see these flashes from the offense. They have yet to put together a full 4 quarters of offensive dominance. And this is really an opportunity to finally go out and show that they can control the game from the opening kick.
Do you think that comes through the air or on the ground?
I mean, it's a good mixture. We haven't seen a big run from any of these running backs where they just take it to the house like Mayan did last year, week 1. We haven't really seen that. The closest thing was Egbuka bringing back a punt that did not count because of penalties. So, if they can clean it up and make those big plays stay permanently, this offense and defense and special teams is going to be electric.
Yeah, Gabe, you make a great point. Ohio State has to address the penalties. I look at just the numbers from last week. It looks like they gave up 9 penalties for almost 85 yards. Ryan Day touched on it in the press conference on Tuesday. That's just something Ohio State needs to address. But, going back to that Arkansas State game, you talk about the run. What stands out to me is that every time Marvin Harrison would catch one of his 3 touchdowns there in the end zone, what set him up to get close or at least into opponent territory was a 40-yard run by Travion Henderson, or, something that Mayan Williams, hooked up there at the line of scrimmage. It's just special to watch Ohio State's offense, whether it's the run game that complements the pass game or vice versa. But just looking at it, you mentioned Emeka Egbuka, his receiving numbers are outstanding so far through 2 games. So are Marvin Harrison's, and they're doing it without Jackson Smith and Jigba or Julian Fleming, 2 of Ohio State's projected starters going into the year. So I think, I think we talked about it last week. Travion Henderson broke out for a 40-yard run there on the first series. Kind of maybe expected that because Ohio State wanted to play fast, kind of set the tone early and get its offense going, because there were a lot of maybe critics, if you will, after that Notre Dame game. Ohio State's offense only scored 21 points, first time in the Ryan Day era. I think that's the fewest they've scored under Ryan Day. So, Ryan Day wanted to clean that up a little bit. I thought Ohio State needed to score at least 50 against Arkansas State. They got close. As you mentioned, they didn't play a full 4-quarter game, were shut out themselves in the fourth quarter, but I think that's something they'll address against Toledo, because looking at the Akron game last year, very similar feel for me going into this game as far as Toledo. But I think Ohio State probably puts up at least 45 and probably more against the Rockets.
I think it's confirmed Jacob hates Maction. I think that's the one thing I gleaned from that entire take is that MAC teams, Jacob doesn't like you.
Well, I asked Ryan and CJ about it today, but, they're playing in-state opponents. You look at Akron and Toledo. I asked them, do you make more of an emphasis when you're playing a team from Ohio? And, Ryan Day said, it's a strange feeling when you're playing a team that's, just not too far from Columbus, Ohio, and campus itself. He referenced Luke Fickell there at Cincinnati. Of course, the Bearcats made the college football playoff, first non-Power 5 team to do so. So, it's going to be interesting. I think it's fun, when Ohio State plays, an in-state program, because being college students ourselves, I'm sure we have plenty of connections across the state of Ohio, and just in terms of that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And Ryan Day made it a point that football in the state of Ohio is such ingrained in everybody's mind. I mean, even at the high school age, you'd go to some of those student sections, they're rowdy, just going nuts, absolutely bonkers, letting loose after a hard school week. They're more on the 9 to 5 as opposed to us, where we have a little bit more open schedules. So they're letting loose as much as students in the South End Zone are at Ohio Stadium. But I mean, like you mentioned, shifting gears to Toledo, like the biggest nugget I took from them, both their first 2 games, each lasted 3 hours and 22 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, are we kidding ourselves here? Are you trying to tell me that's not magical in the sense? And I mean, yeah, now you want to bring up action. But I mean, they only allowed 10 points in the first 2 as defense. So I mean, just the 10 points to UMass, 55-10 victory. That's something special. So I don't think Ohio State needs to blink twice, even though it's Toledo, even though it's a MAC opponent, even though I just said Jacob hates Maction, now I'm hating on Maction. But I mean, yeah, I think Ohio State, they need to watch out for this one, especially with what we've seen around college football.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people have mentioned that this season is very similar to the 2007 college football season already, where a bunch of not even just top 10, but top 5 teams were losing every single week. And we've kind of gotten that chaos here. And so I believe that the Buckeyes should not overlook the Rockets at all. I mean, they're 2-0 to begin the season. They're winning by an average of over 40 points per game. In Saturday's game against Massachusetts, they had 5 different players rush for at least 20 yards, and their leading rusher was the quarterback, DeQuan Finn. So last season, we saw in the Oregon game that Ohio State had difficulty stopping the run, and we saw that probably on an even bigger scale in the Michigan game. So if Ohio State wants to win this game, first and foremost, they're going to have to prevent Toledo from running all over them, and I believe they can do it. Jim Knowles has shown that he's able to adjust pretty much to any offensive game plan that's thrown his way. But I'm curious as to what y'all think Ohio State really needs to look out for in this upcoming matchup.
I mean, the one question I had about the defense was how are they going to be able to stop a mobile quarterback? And that was going into Notre Dame week, and they held Tyler Buckner. They kept him in check. As you mentioned, DeQuan Finn, he's their leading rusher on the season with 138 yards on the ground. And the Rockets in general, they're averaging 230 yards a game, which is 24th in the country. They're 4th in the country in expected points added per play on the ground. So, I mean, with .464. So every time they're touching the ball on the ground, they're having .4 points added to their score. So that's pretty dang impressive, especially for the run. It's knocking down time. I think Toledo might be taking a page out of Notre Dame. Maybe they try and limit Ohio State's possessions a little bit. The one good thing that Jim Knowles said at Tuesday's presser was it's not all about the turnovers. And he was alluding to just stopping the opposition on third down, tackles for loss, maybe limiting to a field goal. And the one thing I want to point to is the tackles for loss. If Ohio State's 16th in the country with 18 tackles for loss in the first 2 games. So if they're able to get in the backfield and stuff the run and really set the edge, especially if Daquan Finn wants to tuck it and run, a lot of it's not necessarily designed quarterback runs, but escaping the pocket and making the most with great coverage in the back end with his legs. If Ohio State's able to keep that contained, I think they're able to keep him in check.
All right. Before we get into our recorded predictions for this week, just wanted to wrap up the rest of the news from Ohio State Athletics. The number 22 women's soccer team, they beat Kent State 2-1 on Sunday during senior night behind 2 goals from Peyton McNamara. They opened conference play Sunday, going to Piscataway, New Jersey to take on the reigning Big Ten champion Rutgers. And then the number 19 ranked field hockey team, although they suffered their first loss at Miami of Ohio Sunday 1-0, they are welcoming number 3 Maryland and number 18 Wake Forest at home this Friday and Sunday respectively. So looking at the line, knowing everything we know so far 2 weeks through the season, I think, and this should be pretty obvious, but I'm going to pick Ohio State to win. But for the 3rd consecutive week in a row, I am not picking them to cover. I believe they'll win 42-14. First half will be a lot closer than people would like, similarly to the Arkansas State game. But I think they'll comfortably win and be in the driver's seat by the end of the 3rd quarter.
Can they put together a full effort offensively? A lot of questions offensively with availability, but I think the Buckeyes get it done and cover 55-10.
Score predictions. Some of the most fun parts of my week, that is, going back to my earlier point about playing in-state opponents, Ohio State, under Ryan Day, they've played Cincinnati, they've played Miami of Ohio, they played Akron, and now they're going to play Toledo. I don't think they've allowed more than 1 touchdown in either of those 3 matchups. I believe they shut out the Bearcats there in 2019, and then surrendered touchdowns, a touchdown rather to Akron, and then allowed a safety there to Miami there in 2019 as well. So I think Ryan Day might subliminally want to have a little bit of a dominant edge over Ohio programs. Cincinnati might have that tilt if they were to match up, but that was last season in the playoff. But just looking at it, Toledo has Dallas Gant, former Buckeye there in their linebacking core. A little bit of a Buckeye relation there. But, Stephen and Gabe mentioned, Ohio State's going to control the game. Can they put together a complete offensive game for 4 quarters? That's something I'm going to be watching for. I'm going to be looking for a defensive takeaway. I think 2 games is a little bit too long for Ohio State's liking. And then I'll probably go on record and say, just as I did earlier, Ohio State needs to score more than 50 points or at least put up a shutout. I'm going to go with 63-7, and Ohio State takes a win there into conference play against Wisconsin.
Very interesting score prediction, Jacob. You mentioned those three games in the past few years. Obviously, there's no non-conference in-state opponent during the COVID year, but the last 3 in-state opponents: 42-0 victory, 76-5 victory against Miami. 42-0 was against Cincinnati, and then 59-7 against Akron a season ago. Do the math. Ohio State in the past 3 meetings is outscoring in-state opponents 177-12. I just had to let it sit in. I had to let that number sink in. 177-12. The one key stat that I'm looking at for Toledo's defense is they're 114th in the FBS and pass points allowed per play, allowing .476. And I think that really plays into Ohio State's hands. C.J. Stroud, he's one of the most prolific passers in the country. So I think this is really sort of his game. I see him going off for 5 touchdowns this upcoming Saturday. Maybe he gets to 6. We'll see. I think that depends on whether Jackson Smith and Jigba and or Julian Fleming play. But I almost put on record. Actually, I am putting on record 5 touchdowns confirmed. I think he goes for over 375 to 400 yards as well. So I'll go, Jacob, you're on the right track. I think Ohio State is going to win 60-6.
Solid 54-point spread.
I guess so. I don't know. I just pulled it out of a hat.
I think that wraps things up for episode 3 of the Revamped Lantern Sports Podcast. Thank you all for listening. For Jacob Benge, Gabe Burggraf, and Casey Smith, I'm Stephen Kishpaugh, and we'll see you in the next episode.